Welcome to Sharks and Genetics. Thank you for the introduction, Claire, and also to the committee here at the Sofia Science Festival for welcoming me here. I'm truly honored. It's my first time in Bulgaria, and seeing the amazing, inspirational host of speakers this past couple days has really given me a lot of motivation and drive to do my work better, because I've seen how amazing everyone here is doing. So really happy to be here, and yeah, let's get on a deep dive to sharks. I just want to share with you guys a little bit about my journey so far. It's by no stretch of the imagination a complete story, but it's going to give you a few clues as to how I got to do what I'm doing. As Claire said, I was inducted into the National Geographic Society last year as an explorer, so I'm still pretty new. It's not even 1 year past. But I've actually been working with Disney, National Geographic for about 2 years now, producing documentaries about sharks, and hoping to tell stories about sharks that give people love and inspiration for these animals rather than fear. On any given day in my research, I can be found here in the water, swimming with some very big and beautiful sharks. These are some tiger sharks down south on an island, in a really remote island in the south of the Maldives. And these sharks are super intelligent. They're not these mindless killers. Sometimes these divers will plant a bit of bait, like a fish head or something, underneath a pile of rocks here. And these sharks will sniff out where this bait is and literally pick the rocks up one at a time to get to the morsel of food underneath. Oftentimes people ask me the question, aren't you scared when you're jumping in the water with these animals? Yes, I am very scared. Most of the time I'm scared because I'm a coward, but not because these animals are actually dangerous. They truly are magnificent, fierce, beautiful animals, but they're also understandable, and they can be interacted with safely. And most of the time when I get in the water with the sharks, my fear, that feeling of scared and what's going to happen, it all goes away because I see them doing things that are not aggressive and not motivated by cruelty. So for me, getting in the water with these sharks is really just a joy. But obviously the feelings I still wrestle with a little bit in my day-to-day. But something that I've always loved about these animals is just how majestic they are. And it has actually inspired me to continue working with them for as long as I'm physically capable. And I always try to ask people if they have a chance to actually get in the water with them, because experiencing them is the only way to really learn and love them. I didn't always start out as a shark scientist. This is me as 12-year-old. I was very popular, as you can see, me and my friends standing next to each other. I grew up in Nairobi in Kenya. It's a landlocked city, nowhere near the ocean. But we got TV there, so I was able to watch a lot of shark movies and documentaries, and I was always kind of scared about it, because what you see in the news and in the print media is that sharks are dangerous. They eat people, and they're out to get you. No matter where you go in the ocean, you're never safe. Then I got to university many years later, and my professor, I was studying medicine at the time, and my professor saw that even though I was in the medical program, I didn't really love it. It wasn't my passion at the time, even after doing it for 4 years. So he hands me this brochure, and I read it, and it said, "Come dive with sharks in South Africa." Now, I was like, this is a terrible idea. I mean, we all know that sharks eat people, right? But going to med school, doing something that I didn't love, didn't seem like something that would be a wise use of my time or my life or my energy. So I thought, I'm going to try and do this thing that scares me before I go on to something that I'm unpassionate about. And that led me to working with great white sharks. Straight off the boat into the water with these animals. I worked at a cage diving company for 6 years. Wrangling sharks every day in this little unsuspecting town called Mossel Bay. Now, you go there and you wouldn't expect anything just by looking at the water, but once you get below the surface, it is packed with these beautiful great white sharks. And Honestly, I love these animals. They have these very unique personalities. Every day we would see them, there's always something interesting that they would show us. Some of them are very charismatic. But one thing that you'll never escape is how they hunt. They have this hunting behavior called a breach, where they come from the bottom, ambushing a seal, and when they grab them at the surface, they launch themselves out of the water and tear this animal to shreds. It's an absolute marvel to watch. I know it looks kind of crazy. I'm kind of crazy, but this is one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in nature, and I would always encourage people, go and see it. But this work that I was doing with sharks, wrangling them at the sea, really ignited my curiosity for these animals again. And it actually made me interested to go back into academia after working at sea for 6 years. And I was always interested in genetics, and I was trying to figure out, how do I actually marry my love of genetics with my love of sharks? And I found a supervisor that was willing to sponsor my crazy ideas, and she led me along and trained me how to be a geneticist so I can learn about these animals. Now, something a geneticist always has to do is get tissue samples of the animal that they want to work with. So it was up to me to essentially go out, find these animals, and get pieces of their skin so that I could analyze them. And I'm going to play a video for you about one of my recent adventures working with great whites and how I get tissue samples from them. Best vantage point we're going to get to sample them. I would lie if I said I wasn't a little bit nervous. There is an element of danger with dealing with these animals.
I'm going to try to get the bait down past you. And then I'm going to try to get the shark to follow and come close to you as possible. And that's when you want to go for it.
We got this.
We got this. I think that's... Oh, bait. Oh! That's gone, that's gone, that's gone, that's gone, that's gone. Come on, Gibbsy. The shark's working, buddy.
The margin of error is quite small, so I can sample them in the right spot so that I can get the right tissue and also not harm the sharks.
Here he comes. Woo! That fast?
Yeah.
Dang! He sped it! He sped it! Nice! Okay. It was actually a good placement. Nice work, Gibbs! Perfect! Woo! How did that look?
It worked out perfectly.
Nice, man! Okay, let me process this. That's the key part we're looking for. The skin.
With the first sample on deck, they only have an hour to collect the remaining samples.
We have to make sure that tissue stays alive long enough for us to get to the lab.
Look at that! Pressing a lot.
Here comes the shark again.
And grayer. Different colour. Can you see that?
Yeah,
different
see that.
Got it! Got it! Yeah!
2 down.
Perfect shot. My boys got it. Gibbs is shooting well. That's where the tissue's thickest. You're going to stay far away from any of the vital organs if you hit just at the base of the dorsal fin like that. Perfect little skin tag.
Yeah.
But you know, I know he's been stressing a lot about his aim on that. So to actually see it placed so beautifully just at the base of the dorsal fin,
It's perfect.
it makes me really happy for him. Out of blue, eh?
There is a new shark. Yep.
He was so shy just now, man, just suddenly. Peter, shows you what these things got in them when they want to get.
There he is again. We're the one that we have.
We have to look on this side of her, see if that, because he did hit one low. The problem is if we sample the same shark twice. No. Get that dorsal fin, it's very distinct. This guy's a player.
I think I got it.
He's got that hurt dorsal fin. Come on, Gibbs, hit the shot. This could be it. This could be the third successful sample. As long as Gibbs knows it's one that we can sample. Here he comes, here he comes. This could be it, this could be it, this could be it, this could be it, this could be it. I'm just gonna bring him straight in. Oh, jeez.
Spoiler alert, I survived. So, once I get my tissue samples, I take them back to the lab so I can do my genetic analysis. And the shark's DNA always tells a fascinating story. One of the most interesting findings came from a genetics lab in the United States. And they found these genes in sharks that have this property called an adaptive immunity. Now, if anyone's ever seen the X-Men movies, there's a character in there called Wolverine. And every time he gets hurt, he's able to heal his skin like it was never hurt at all. And sharks have a similar function. Now, I've seen sharks get with wounds from boats. They've been hit by a boat, and they have this massive scar in their side, and it's bleeding. And you think, this animal only has a couple days left to live, no more than that. Yet, day after day, week after week, and after months, you start to see the shark has healed that wound. And after a year of healing, it's almost like that wound never existed. Now, if you were at the talk of Andrew Steele yesterday, he spoke about gene therapy. Now, there's something that we can potentially do with these genes from sharks in a biomedical way if we wanted to heal people that have experienced traumas from car accidents or from war. So this is an actual application of taking wild animals and using it in medicine to actually improve our condition. This is one really cool component of what genetics can do, what's the promise of genetics in the future. But something that I've learned from analyzing shark DNA also is that there's not always a great story behind it. And that's also looking at the conservation status of many of these animals, which I will get into a little bit more later. But for now, I want to talk to you guys about these sharks that I found in the Maldives. I found this article that was written, it was a very short paper, just 2 pages. There was these sharks in the Maldives that had developed this very peculiar spots on their skin. Now, sharks don't normally have spots, but you know, it's nature, it's the wilderness, there's crazy things that happen all the time. So I just put the paper away and tried not to think too much about it. But as I kept walking away from this, I kept thinking, but what would actually cause spots on a shark? And not even just one, but many sharks in a single population. And the paper said it was a genetic disorder called leucism. And as a geneticist, I knew that I should probably investigate it a little bit further. So my study for my PhD, which this ended up becoming my PhD, was what is leucism? And more importantly, why is it present in these sharks in such a high number? So you might think that leucism is just like albinism. When you see an albino animal, you generally see the animal has no color in any of its tissues. So no color in the skin, nor the hair, nor the eyes. And this is caused by an enzymatic deficiency. There's an enzyme that's just not produced in the body, and it doesn't code for color. Leucism, on the other hand, is different in this way, in that it actually affects a skin cell called a melanocyte. And this melanocyte stops working properly in only some parts of the tissue. So, if you look at this lion, you'll think it's well, actually, I should ask, do you think it's an albino or a leucistic lion? Anyone? I don't have that whole picture, but maybe you're right. I should have showed you the whole line. But there's some clues that we can look out for. So, if you look at the eyes of the lion, it has the typical wild type color of eyes that a normal lion would have, which means that it's not an albino lion because you'd also lose color in the eyes. And you'll also note that there's a bit of that golden hair that we typify with lions. So this is actually a leucistic lion, not an albino lion. So how does the melanocyte actually work? Essentially, the melanocyte lives just under our skin, and sharks have it in the exact same way. So, for example, when you get a stimulus from the sun, the melanocyte picks this up and it says this is actually damaging us. So what it does is it shoots melanin pigment out into the skin, and then the shark gets darker. And you have probably seen this if you've ever been at the beach long enough. You come out after a while and you look dark. And if you haven't had enough sun, then your skin gets light again. And it works exactly the same as sharks. So when the melanocyte stops working properly, you get this patchy pattern on the shark's skin, and people also have this as well. So you have the same stimulus from the sun, but only certain cells produce melanin pigment. And then the rest of the cells are exposed to the ultraviolet rays, which is not a good thing. So the melanocyte is actually a type of nerve cell. And as we know, nerves are pretty important for many functions in the body. They help us with our motor functions, how we move, our sensory functions, how we hear, see, feel, taste, and also other cellular functions, things like our immunity. These kinds of immune responses are mounted because of our nerve cells. So the question is, what are the effects when these cells stop working properly? Leucism is actually a genetic disorder, and it's a very complex in its genetics. So there's many types of genes that make a leucistic phenotype or a leucistic physical feature. And we know a lot about leucism from studying many of our domesticated animals. So these are our pets and our livestock. But it's still quite rare in fish and even more rare in sharks. But is it all bad, really? We've seen leucistic animals all through the animal kingdom. This cow is a leucistic cow, and it's a type of leucism called piebaldism. And all it is just no color in the cow's skin. And these cows will live long, illustrious lives, producing many gallons of milk, and will not have any problems otherwise. But there are other animals that have leucism. In horses, leucism produces deafness. This is affecting its sensory capabilities. In mice, it makes infertility, and in sheep, it makes an immune deficiency. So these sheep will get sick much quicker and much longer and won't be able to mount an immune response against infections. But there's actually one species where we've studied leucism quite extensively, and that's actually us. Now, there's a type of leucism in people called vitiligo. And I don't know if you've ever seen someone with this disease or this genetic disorder, but essentially they just have patches of their skin where they don't have the ability to produce melanin. And of course, if you have this, you're probably going to be very careful about how you interact with the sun. So most people with vitiligo will actually cover up their skin because they know if they stay long in the sun and their skin gets exposed, they will very easily develop carcinomas, skin cancers, essentially. And there's another type of leucism in humans, and that's actually called Waardenburg syndrome. And I think this one is worse. Essentially, you can get hearing loss, intestinal blockages, so the affected individuals will actually have symptoms of constipation constantly through their life. And then also other congenital abnormalities, like their limbs don't grow long enough. So you have children that have arms and legs that are simply not to the full length. So this is something that is definitely, it hampers the quality of life. But the way that this thing comes into us is by consanguinity, or inbreeding. So essentially, when you have incestuous relationships formed in a population, you get an increased number of, or increased chance of developing something like Waardenburg syndrome. So, my hypothesis for my doctorate is that the leucism that I am seeing in these sharks is actually developed from inbreeding. But why would I think that there's inbreeding in a wild population? So I actually looked at the fisheries catch reports in the Maldives. And these records of how much fish was caught in the Maldives are immaculate. They take their time and they really report everything very accurately. So what we see here in the black is a time in the Maldives before the Maldives opened up their borders for international trade, and they didn't allow any fishing vessels to come in their waters. In the mid-1970s, they opened up their borders, and the first year they already doubled their annual catches of sharks. And what you notice is a trend of a very gradual increase followed by a steep decline, an increase followed by a steep decline. And we keep going like this up until about the early 2000s when they basically fished out the entire Maldives and collapsed the entire fishery. And when we get to the year 2010, around here, they basically decided that we're going to protect sharks because they need protection. But unfortunately, it was already too late. Something that also that didn't escape me is the effect of climate change. Now, these spotted sharks were not found in the Maldives before 2015. So I had to ask, what happened in 2015 that made all of a sudden these spotted sharks to pop up? And there was an El Nino event. Essentially, the sea surface temperatures were 2 to 3 degrees hotter than normal. And when I literally just came back from the Maldives 2 weeks ago, and I took the water temperature every day, and it didn't go below 31 degrees, and about 32 degrees on average, which is simply too hot for the ocean. This is an actual marine heat wave that's destroying our sea and destroying the animals that live in our seas. So imagine with me that we have an ocean full of sharks. And let's say, for the sake of argument, that these sharks belong to their own individual groups, which we will call a population. These populations will mix their genes with each other by mating with each other. And that keeps the diversity, the genetic diversity, high, so that they have a nice gene pool full of many different types. But what ends up happening is we start fishing them out, and we catch these individuals without discrimination, one after the other, until there's just a few individuals from each of these populations left. When these populations start to regenerate, they reproduce, and then the equilibrium, the mixing of these genes, is thrown out of balance. And now we have a situation where there are more types of one individual than there are of another. So what I did is these last couple years, I've been going to the Maldives and I've been catching these sharks and analyzing their DNA. And I'm going to show you some of my results. So when I look at the genes of these animals, this is essentially a haplotype map. So what we have here is we have two lines in red for each individual. One of these lines is the genes that are inherited from mom, and then the other line is the gene that is inherited from their dad. And what I see here is that there are more areas of similarity than there are of difference, which means that their gene pool is closer to a gene puddle. There's not as many diverse types. But then I had to ask, what actually would cause because you have sampling bias, maybe you went to the wrong areas, what would potentially cause more individuals in your sample to be more similar to each other? And I thought, maybe they're related. So I used my genetic tools again, and I looked how many of these sharks are actually related. And this is a heat map. It's basically a pairwise comparison of individuals to each other. So, for example, we have individual 24 here, and we can compare that to individual 22 and see that there's not that much relation between the two individuals. So the darker color is the lack of a relationship between them, and the lighter colors are where we do find strong relationships. Now, when I look at this heat map, I can see that the majority of these sharks are not related. There's a few siblings in here, brothers and sisters. Some of them are half-siblings as well. But the vast majority are unrelated, but they still share a lot of genetic information with each other, which is not good for a healthy, diverse population. So, what am I going to do about it? So I've essentially been going out into the different areas of the Maldives and sampling these sharks. What we normally do is we start out with a drone survey, and this is a really cool application where technology is allowing us to understand the ecology of these animals much faster. Once we find these individuals, we generally use some fishing tools, same like a regular fisherman would use, but instead of trying to kill these animals, we are trying to study them. So once we catch them, usually in this situation we're using a hook and a line. We take some data on these sharks, try to figure out is it a male or a female, and then we measure the length of it. And these records we keep so that we can understand how these animals are thriving and adapting in our environment. So this is me taking the length of the shark, and then we have Daya here taking pictures of the shark, and I have an entire catalog of these sharks that I've sampled in the Maldives. And like I said, one of the key features is the eye of the shark, and I can see that this is definitely not a leucistic one, and that's what the wild type color looks of these sharks. We get some nice videos of them to show that it's healthy. You can see that the gills are still breathing. And then I cut a little hole in the belly of the animal, and then I put a little tracking chip in there. And that tracking chip will tell me where this shark is going. This is me doing a surgery, and I gotta say, it really makes my hands shake every time because, you see this animal, and it's literally, its life is in your hands, and you have to make sure you do the surgery fast enough so you don't hamper the shark's chances of success. Not the best surgery on this one, but we actually managed to do a decent job and get the shark out fast enough. Once we tie the sutures, we tie about 2 or 3 stitches. It's really not a big incision. And then it's up to us to actually safely release it. The shark is actually upside down in a state called tonic immobility. So you don't need anesthesia. It literally goes limp when you hold it upside down. And then I swim the shark out just a little bit until it gets some oxygen flowing over its gills, and then you see it give a nice powerful kick, and off it goes. And that shark will tell me exactly where it's going with that tracking chip inside of it. As I said before, I take photos of just about every one of my sharks, again, to keep the records going, to keep learning about these animals, because there's not much information out there about them. And then I also take some tissue. With the great white, it was a lot bigger. This one is much smaller. It's just about 6 millimeters. This piece of tissue contains billions of copies of DNA, and it's literally not much bigger than the tip of your pinky finger. And it makes sure that I don't take too much tissue from the shark, but I can still learn just as much as any ecological study could do with different tools. Then basically what I do is I install these listening stations. So I put the chip inside the shark, but something has to actually hear what the chip is doing. And this listening station is essentially just a receiver for the audio noise that comes from my tags. We put each of these all around the different areas we go to in the Maldives, and then they tell us where the shark is going. And these tags are really amazing devices. They're essentially a passport that tells me where these sharks are going. So every time they go to a new area, I'll get a ping. So I'll see where that shark exactly was and how long it stood there for. And I've been putting trackers all around the Maldives, so hopefully in the coming years I can see how they're using these spaces, which will tell me how we can better manage these populations. But that's just about my research, but at the end of the day, I always still have to get to the point of shark conservation. Do sharks matter? And this is a question that I often have to struggle with people because there's a lot of negative PR for sharks, and people really don't see the need in having sharks. And I've actually talked to locals in the Maldives that do not believe we need sharks in our ocean because, sharks eat our fish and they actually kill our people. Why should we have sharks around? We should kill sharks rather. And I see infographics like this. And I think this is a pretty selfish way of looking at why do we need sharks. And this is pretty much saying that sharks are helping keep our oceans clean. They kill the sick and the weak animals, so only the fittest animals have resources in the ocean. And then it keeps toxic compounds from building up in our ocean, so we don't have fish, for example, that have a buildup of metals and other things that could harm us. You also have ecosystem services like oxygen. 50% of our oxygen comes from oceans, and sharks help regulate that system. But this is not going to convince anyone to keep sharks alive because we still haven't done it knowing what we know now. There's plenty of information out there. And during the pandemic, I actually tracked the trade of sharks primarily through Europe. And it was kind of alarming because, of course, you think people don't really want to have sharks in our oceans, but we need them to survive because we clearly use them as a stable source of food all around the world. And what alarmed me, especially during the pandemic, is how much sharks were being killed for food, even at a time when the industries were slow. you'd walk into some of these markets and you'd find a large mound of one type of shark, and then a large mound of another type of shark, and then a large mound of sea turtles and dolphins and just about anything you can think of. And you have to wonder, is this sustainable? If you're just looking at even one fishery port, and then multiply that by however many fishery ports exist, I don't think that there's that much fish in the ocean. We can't simply sustain this. Yet, and it gets worse, the marine heat waves are destroying a lot of coral reefs. Everywhere I go in the Maldives, I'm sure to find a dead or bleached coral. And that is because we've also not managed to find a sustainable energy source to keep us alive. So our carbon emissions and our methane emissions are so high, and it makes our oceans hot. And things like the corals can't survive, and I think my sharks are also not going to be able to make it. But then you turn on the print media and you see photos like this. And I actually took this photo, and I feel kind of irresponsible for even sharing it. But this is always what you kind of think about when you think about a shark. You don't think of a nice, beautiful animal, even though the shark is sort of doing what it's always done for millions of years. It hunts. It keeps our oceans healthy. It has a place on this planet just as much as we do. We don't really have a right to say they're evil or they're man-eaters, but we're really good at listening to alternative facts and lies because that's all we have pretty much on our televisions and our social media. Which is why I feel so motivated in the work that I do, working with some really generous folks at Disney Nat Geo to tell inspirational stories about sharks that show their true colors, in hopes that it would actually help people to see these animals in a different light. I really feel like bombarding people with too much facts is not going to help. Again, experiencing these animals firsthand is going to be the key to actually wanting to keep them around. So that's what I'm going to try and do, and take as many people along the way with me as I can. So I'd like to thank my sponsors that helped me get along this far in my journey. But yeah, I'm also posting a lot of my research updates on social media, so if you'd like to give me a follow, I'll share as much as I possibly can. And yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions.
Thank you for the nice presentation. I have two questions which are connected. Are they collectivistic kind of sharks? For example, they are hunting in groups, and if such kind of shark exists, how leucistic sharks are accepted in this group from the normal sharks? Because as far as I know, even by the people, there is some misunderstandings against albino people, for example, in your continent, in Africa, in Nigeria. This is maybe interesting question. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm actually from Kenya, but it's close.
Kenya is in Africa.
Yes. So these sharks in the Maldives, these blacktip reef sharks, are kind of unusual as far as other sharks go. So for example, you have great whites who normally hunt alone. But these blacktip reef sharks actually use social interactions in order to learn about threats and also to have a higher advantage when they hunt. And they hunt in a mob sometimes. So there is a collectivistic aspect to these blacktip reef sharks. Do they oftentimes, I don't know, reject the albinos or the leucistics or the odd ones out? I don't think so. I think these sharks, they do have vision, but they don't have bias because of their vision. I think that's a very human trait, and I don't think that we can put that on the sharks necessarily.
I have a question, because when you conduct a research, there is always a sample size, and I was curious, when conducting a research of such scope, what was the sample size needed in order to reach conclusions? Yeah,
that's a really good question. So typically in an ecological study, samples are hundreds and thousands. But because we have genetics and we have whole genome sequencing, I can look at more areas in the genomes that will tell me more information, so I have less of a sample size. And in the last season I did just here in April, I was only sampling 21 sharks, and that's going to tell me a lot more information than even 100 sharks would in a regular ecological study. The downside is when I present my results, for example, to a ministry in a government, they oftentimes don't understand the application of genetics. They know what genetics is, but they don't see how is it going to be interesting for us to incorporate in our management schemes. So it's actually up to me to try and convince them and present the actual advantages of genetics rather than something like a pure ecological count.
Thank you,
Cheers.
and
Yeah.
thank you for the lecture.
Thank you.
Just a quick question. This was very interesting about the genetics pool that has shrunk. Is this reversible in a way? So if the sharks that you are studying and how do you call it, leucistic?
Leucistic, yeah.
Okay. Would this reverse in time through, I don't know, mutation or introduction of other members of the shark community, or it's going to, it's done? Basically.
Yeah.
And another quick question. I hear that you're working with the local communities about your conservation efforts in the Maldives. We have similar problems here in Bulgaria, let's say related to bears and stuff like this. It would be great if you can elaborate further about, are your efforts successful? What's the outcome, and so on and so forth?
Yeah. Okay, so the first question about is inbreeding, for example, or is this leucistic thing, is it reversible? Yes and no. So yes, because it is definitely possible. For example, if we have a population of animals living within a fenced area, like sheep or cattle, and you see high degrees of inbreeding. I work actually in a genetics lab that most people work with, livestock, for example. What they do normally is they take sheep from another farm and they mix them. And all you need is one generation of outbreeding with another population to fix most of the problems with inbreeding. That's all you really need. But I don't know how we can do that with the sharks. I mean, are we going to drive sharks all the way from Australia to the Maldives? Maybe, but that's pretty expensive and not very practical. Which then goes to why it's probably not possible to fix this or reverse this very quickly. Now, genetic mutations do build up over time. But you have to let that population sort of go for a while and not kill and harvest them. With the Maldives right now, I wouldn't recommend that they continue fishing sharks. And they don't now, but maybe they'll reverse the legislation to protect sharks in 5 or 10 years because there's more sharks around, right? They're healthy again. But if you look at the DNA, it tells me a completely different story. Which goes to the point about the management and the municipalities. I went to an island called Gafaru in North Malay Atoll, maybe like 3 weeks ago, and I talked to the local council about protecting sharks and doing conservation work with them, and they showed me photos of their tuna that they had caught, and they said they pulled out this tuna and a shark bit it, and they're like, there's so many sharks we can't even catch a tuna. They bite our tuna right in half before we can bring it on the boat. We don't need to conserve sharks, we need to kill them. And of course, I don't want to throw facts at them and then be like, no, you're wrong. This is not how it works. But again, it's been a challenge for me because I don't like when people come from a high horse and tell someone else what they do because I'm a scientist. I know better than all of you. That's not how it really works. And that's also why it's challenging to do conservation work with sharks is because you have people who have real lived experiences in those areas. I'm not Maldivian, I don't live there. All I can do is try and show them my work and walk along with them and see what they see as well. And I do like that. It also teaches me a little bit about their life and their culture and potential solutions and how to fix it. I can't say that I have a good answer for this, but I just try and be honest with people.
Just wondered if the shark's hearing is impaired in any way because of the leucism?
Oh, that's a good question. Potentially, yes, because the leucism does affect the sensory organs of these sharks. I don't know how I would test that, though. And that's a really cool opportunity to try and develop some tools to test sharks' hearing and how it's affected. And the way sharks actually hear, they don't actually have ears. by the way. They have these organs all along their body called a lateral line. This is full of pores that essentially detect vibrations. So they don't really hear sounds in the same way. They hear movement, really low frequency sounds. So perhaps you could design an experiment, maybe if you had like something that vibrated in the water, and then you could actually put that in the water to see if the sharks would detect it. And maybe it would elicit a predatory response if that thing was vibrating like prey, for example. That could be a way of testing that.
I'm just curious if this research is leading you to any new additional interesting research questions you would like to further explore in the future.
Yeah, something that I've, with my research that's come up is looking at the genes that are actually responsible for leucism, and actually what the other genes in those areas of the sharks do. And something that I've actually been looking at is how sharks, their motor functions and how it all works. So for example, we have sharks' fins and how they move, and something that we've actually learned with manta rays, for example, is they actually have genes that code for they have fins on their head, actually, and those genes are the same that go on their arms. So I think that could be something interesting to explore down the line. Thank you, guys.